What Dostoyevsky understood with such wonderful clarity is that the romantic notions of old Verhovensky are the inevitable prelude to the devilish ones of his son Peter, and that both derive from the man who might be regarded as the patron saint of this place, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who insisted that men can only be free when they do what they like, and that doing what they like is conducive to their individual and collective happiness, peace, and security. Exactly the opposite, Dostoyevsky says, is the case. When men are dominated by their own desires, they fall into the most terrible of all servitudes. Young Verhovensky is simply old Verhovensky writ large. The old one is serious and foolish. The young one is frivolous and merciless. And after them both comes inexorably the Gadarene rush over the cliff. Old Verhovensky is a marvelous piece of characterization, immensely funny, and in his own way, immensely touching. How often his voice has been heard in this place, calling for peace, for liberty, for democracy. He's Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, he's Bertrand Russell, he's Pope John, he's every siren voice urging us to follow Peter Verhovensky, who's waiting to hand us over to the sloganeers, the brainwashers, the dogmatists, from whom there can be no escape. Dostoyevsky was a God-possessed man, if ever there was one, as is clear in everything he wrote and in every character he created. All his life he was questing for God, and only found him, if indeed he ever really did, at the end of his days, after passing through what he called the hellfire of doubt. Freedom to choose between good and evil he saw as the very essence of earthly existence. Better even to choose evil than to have no choice. The devil, he insists, has a necessary role in our human drama. Without him, there can be no play, though there can be contentment and well-being of a kind. This was Tolstoy's dream of a kingdom of heaven on earth, which was to Dostoyevsky deeply abhorrent. This is the dream, too, of all authoritarians, temporal and ecclesiastical, especially the latter. As Dostoyevsky explains in one of his most famous passages, Ivan Karamazov's account to his brother Alyosha of an imaginary encounter between the Grand Inquisitor and the returned Christ in 16th century Seville. Christ has reappeared among the people and been recognized. He's performed miracles, as he did in Galilee. In his infinite mercy, he once more walked among men in the semblance of man. The people are drawn to him by an irresistible force. They surround him, they throng about him, they follow him. He walks among them in silence, with a gentle smile of infinite compassion. The sun of love burns in his heart. Rays of light, of enlightenment, and of power stream from his eyes, and, pouring over the people, stir their hearts with responsive love. He stretches forth his hands to them, blesses them, and a healing virtue comes from contact with him, even from his garments. Then, in the Cathedral of Seville, he raises from the dead a small girl who has been brought in there for burial. Just as she's sitting up in her coffin and looking round her with surprise in her smiling eyes, just at that moment, the Cardinal himself, the Grand Inquisitor, passes by the cathedral in the square. He's an old man of nearly 90, tall and erect, with a shriveled face and sunken eyes, from which, though a light like a fiery spark still gleams. He stops in front of the crowd and watches from a distance. He sees everything, and his face darkens. He knits his grey, beetling brows, and his eyes flash with an ominous fire. He stretches forth his finger and commands the guard to seize him. The guards take their prisoner to the dark, narrow, vaulted prison in the old building of the sacred court and lock him in there. The day passes and night falls, the dark, hot and breathless Seville night. The air is heavy with the scent of laurel and lemons. Amid the profound darkness, the iron door of the prison is suddenly opened, and the old Grand Inquisitor himself slowly enters the prison with a light in his hand. He's alone, and the door at once closes behind him. He stops in the doorway and gazes for a long time, for more than a minute, into his face. At last, he approaches him slowly, puts the lamp on the table, and says to him, "Is it you? You?" The terrible burden that Christ had laid on mankind, the Grand Inquisitor explained, was freedom. When in the wilderness, the devil offered deliverance from this burden, the offer was recklessly rejected. Thus, Christ refused to turn stones into bread, thereby abolishing hunger, and refused to jump from a high pinnacle in the temple to create wonder and awe, thereby attracting people to him and his cause, and refused to take over the kingdoms of the earth, thereby putting himself in a position to create utopias everywhere. He even, for the sake of freedom, insisted on dying himself. However, quite soon after his death, his church decided to close with the devil's offer, and in place of freedom, provided miracles, mystery, and authority. In contemporary terms, affluence, the marvels of science, and an all-powerful state, to the very great betterment of the human condition. If now Christ remained in the world, he'd upset everything again with this terrible, devastating, sublime freedom of his. So, again, he must die. All the time, the Grand Inquisitor has been speaking. Christ has remained quite silent, said not a word, as on a previous occasion before Caiaphas. The Grand Inquisitor saw that the prisoner had been listening intently to him all the time, looking gently into his face and evidently not wishing to say anything in reply. The old man would have liked him to say something, however bitter and terrible. But he suddenly approached the old man and kissed him gently on his bloodless, aged lips. That was all his answer. The old man gave a start. There was an imperceptible movement at the corners of his mouth. He went to the door and opened it and said to him, "Go and come no more. Don't come at all. Never, never." And he let him out into the dark streets and lanes of the city. The prisoner went away, leaving the old man with that kiss glowing in his heart and his idea staying in his mind. And so it remains still.